Okay, today we're going to talk about learning, which is Chapter 8. Now, learning is pretty much the same definition that you would see in the dictionary. It's a relatively permanent change in behavior, which is based on prior experiences. So you learn not to touch the stove from touching the stove. Now, kind of a little bit of a history review. John B. Watson, basically, who was the founder of behaviorism, remember B stands for behaviorism, basically said that behaviorism, in order for something to be studied, it has to be observed. It has to be able to be overtly observed, so you have to be able to see it. So in order to measure learning, you would have to measure, simply you would have to watch, visibly watch somebody, okay, or observe someone learning something. It's no longer internal. Now, Pavlov, which is basically kind of one of the contributors to behaviorism, basically believed, from studying the digestive system of dogs, discovered that dogs would automatically salivate when they sensed food. Now, this basically led to the ideas of classical conditioning. And what he concluded was dogs were learning to associate the clanging of a food bowl, okay, with simply the anticipation of getting food. So in other words, the clanging of the food bowls led to the dog believing that it was going to get food very shortly. Now, these are kind of the terminology that you have to be very familiar with for classical conditioning. But according to Pavlov, classical conditioning is the result of repeated pairings of an unconditioned stimulus, okay, with a neutral stimulus, eventually causing that neutral stimulus to become a learned or conditioned stimulus. Now you got to be able to keep this straight. This is one part of the video where I would, kind of review it, make sure you understand it before you move on. But if it's unconditioned, you did not learn it. That's how you remember it. You did not learn it. It happens automatically. Neutral stimulus means neutral. It doesn't do anything. When you see the word condition, condition means learn. See what I've learned. So see what I've learned. Unconditioned, you had not learned this. You did not learn it. Now, what do I mean by this? You did not have to learn, okay, or a dog did not have to learn that every time it sees food, it's going to start to salivate. It happens automatically. So, unconditioned stimulus, again, you did not learn. A stimulus means to cause something. Food, automatically, dog didn't have to learn, automatically causes a dog to salivate. Unconditioned response is the result of being, or the result of being exposed to that stimulus. So unconditioned, again, happens automatically. You did not have to learn it. So the response in this particular situation with the dog is the salivation. It's the result, the unconditioned result, okay, of being exposed to an unconditioned stimulus. Now, again, neutral stimulus that does not do anything, okay? For example, until you put food in a dog's bowl, that bowl is neutral. It doesn't mean anything to the dog. Okay? Now, condition, see what I've learned. Condition means learn. Okay? An original neutral stimulus, like a bowl, once it's paired with food, in the dog's mind, the dog's going to learn that every time it sees its bowl, it will eventually know it's going to get food. So in other words, condition means simply a hint at what's going to come. It's a predictor. So the bowl predicts that the dog's going to get food. Now, conditioned response is a learned response. So if the dog salivates, every time now it sees its bowl, it has learned, okay, that when it sees its bowl, it's going to get food. So the response is, now to the conditioned stimulus, it's called the conditioned response. A learned stimulus, the dog learned that every time it sees a bowl, stimulus, it's going to get a treat or food. It salivates. It's a learned response. It's learned to respond to the bowl. Okay? Now, kind of just to re-explain that, Pavlov's experiment. Pavlov placed food or meat powder, which again, unconditioned stimulus. Food will unconditionally, you did not have to learn, will unconditionally cause a dog to simply salivate. So, the meat powder, the UCS, unconditioned stimulus, automatically produced salivation or saliva. Now the saliva is called the unconditioned response. Again, it's an unlearned, or you did not have to learn to salivate, okay, every time the dog saw the food. Now, during the second phase, Pavlov introduced a musical tone. that prior to conditioning elicited no response. So it was called a neutral stimulus. Did nothing. Okay? Neutral means nothing. Now, just to make this common sense get away from the screen, if every time Pavlov rang this bell and then gave the dog food, let's look at common sense what the dog's learning. The dog's learning that every time it hears that bell, it expects to get food. So the bell becomes a predictor. Notice I said the word learned. Okay? So the neutral stimulus basically becomes the conditioned stimulus. Because now it's gone from doing nothing to simply predicting that an unconditioned stimulus or food is going to come. Okay? So it's called a conditioned stimulus. And then when the dog simply starts to respond to the bell alone, the dog has learned to do that. Conditioned means learn. See what I've learned. Every time the dog hears a bell, it will start to salivate. Okay? Now, put it into a nice little graph for you. Meat powder unconditionally causes the dog to salivate. Okay? Again, unconditioned. You did not have to learn this. It happens automatically. The meat powder plus the ringing of the bell eventually will simply be paired. You pair these two together. That's the second phase. Okay, the dog's learning every time it hears a tone, it expects to get food. Eventually, when it does, the tone alone becomes the conditioned stimulus. And since the dog is salivating to the tone alone, it's called the conditioned response. Learn, process of learning, prior to learning. Okay? Now, a couple questions here. Every time Rachel's parents leave her with Lisa, the babysitter, Rachel cries. Lisa came to Rachel's third birthday party, which caused Rachel to cry. According to the principles of classical conditioning, what is the conditioned stimulus? Condition means learn. So in this particular example, we'll take it slow and I'll walk you through. Okay? Every time Rachel's parents leave, her with Lisa, okay, the babysitter, Rachel cries. So again, Lisa is learning, okay? Or in other words, Rachel is learning. Once she sees the babysitter, she knows her parents are going to leave. Okay? So according to the principles of classical conditioning, what did she learn? Okay? Rachel's parents leaving, Rachel crying, Rachel seeing Lisa at her house, Lisa living Rachel's house, people singing at Rachel's birthday party. Now most of you would have picked, okay, letter C. The conditioned stimulus is previously neutral stimulus that has been paired with the unconditioned stimulus repeatedly. Once that association is made, the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus. So again, going back to this, Rachel seeing Lisa at her house. Every time Rachel sees Lisa, she knows that her parents are going to leave. Now, other factors in classical conditioning. Generalization. The tendency for a conditioned response to be elicited, which means caused, by similar stimuli. Now, this is what I want you to make sure you understand. It's good you're watching this video. I always like to say, generally speaking, the bells sounded the same. So conditioned response is a learned response. So let's back it up. Dogs have learned that every time they hear a bell, they expect to get food. So hearing the bell causes the dog to salivate. It's a learned response. The bell went from a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. But generalization, what that's implying is, let's say you find another bell, not quite the same one, a little bit different, not much different. You ring it, you look over, and the dog is salivating. That's called stimulus generalization. Generally speaking, the bells sound the same. Now, in order for generalization to take place, the conditioned response, the dog has to salivate to the sound of that other bell. If that is the case, that's stimulus generalization. Now, just continuing, if the dog doesn't salivate, that means that the two bells are too different. The dog can discriminate between the sounds of the two bells. So you have the original bell, that every time the dog hears, it expects to get food, causes him to salivate. You take another bell, that's completely different, you ring it, the dog just stares at you, because it's too different of a bell sound to make the connection to the original bell. In this particular example, the bells were very similar. So generally speaking, they were the same. Here, they were different. Okay? Now, with second or higher order conditioning, Okay? Let's say you have the dog. Now going back, we'll start over. Originally you had the meat powder or food, we'll just say food, caused the dog to automatically salivate. So unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. Now you want to simply have the dog associate a bell with the food. So how do you do it? You ring the bell and give the dog the food. The dog will learn that every time it hears the bell, it expects to get food. So the bell went from nothing stimulus or neutral stimulus to now a learned stimulus. Now with this concept, higher order conditioning or second, you have the bell. It's a conditioned stimulus. Okay? It got that way by being associated with the food in the beginning. Well, now if you take a light, so you ring the bell, flash a light, then give the dog a treat, what the dog will learn is, here's you go, you got the dog. Just learn to salivate to the sound of a bell. If you pair it now with a light, what happens is the bell becomes the next predictor that it's going to get a light. So eventually, the dog will make the connection. It'll hear the bell, expect to hear a light. That will also trigger, a conditioned or learned response. So now you had food originally caused salivation. You paired it with a bell. That caused salivation. Now you paired the bell with a light. Now the light causes salivation. So in other words, the conditioned stimulus became another pair for something else to be learned with. Now, after repeated trials, like I said, the light became a conditioned stimulus. Now, when a conditioned stimulus no longer elicits the conditioned response, so in other words, the bell no longer causes the dog to salivate, it is said to go through extinction. Now, let's say you get tired of your dog constantly salivating every time it hears a bell. Ask yourself this. Why is the dog salivating? Because in its mind it's learned that when it hears the bell, it expects to give a treat. So if you don't want the dog salivating anymore to the bell, don't give the dog what it expects. So you ring the bell and guess what? Exactly. You don't give the dog the treat. Now, so what that basically says in the wording up here, extinction occurs when the conditioned response is no longer visible. Well, how that occurs? Pavlov stopped presenting the meat powder with the tone. Okay? Dog didn't get what it wanted to. So now it rang the bell. Dog knew it wasn't getting food anymore, so it didn't show any type of conditioned response. The conditioned response not being displayed, in other words, the dog salivating, proves that extinction took place. Now, if the UCS is once again presented, so let's say a week goes by. Alright, you rang the bell, you never gave the dog a treat after that. Basically, it extinguished or stopped the dog salivating to the sound of the bell. Well, you got to remember, you taught the dog this previously. The dog's going to have a memory of getting a treat when it heard a bell. So what happens is, reconditioning is the word quick relearning of a previous extinct CS-CR association. And what that means, very simply, people, is maybe it took you 7 or 8 times to teach the dog to associate a bell with getting a treat. Now, because you've already taught the dog once, it'll probably only take once or twice. Now, reconditioning is reintroducing the treat after the bell. What this is referred to is once the dog does salivate to the bell again, it's called spontaneous recovery. And it's the recovery of a previously extinguished response, which in that case was the dog salivating. Okay, once it occurs again, the result is called spontaneous recovery. This right here is reteaching the dog. This right here is the result. Okay? Now, little Albert was a famous experiment. And Watson, John B. Watson, and his assistant Rosie O. Rayner wanted to know if you can condition emotions. And how they did this was simply, and it was unethical. I don't want to get too much into that, but they were kind of put their parents, little Albert's parents, kind of in the dark on terms of what was exactly going to happen. But long and short of it, okay, little Albert was not afraid of white rats previous to this experiment. So white rats were a neutral stimulus. They did nothing. White rat came out, little Albert just stared at it, didn't respond to it. However, what happened was, little Albert was automatically scared of loud noises. So a loud noise, because it caused, remember, caused the stimulus, and because it automatically caused, as little Albert didn't have to learn that. Okay, it was called the unconditioned stimulus, was the loud noise, and he would start to cry, and because he didn't have to be taught to cry as a response, it was called the unconditioned response. Now, most of you probably putting this together, how they were able to make little Albert afraid of this white rat. All they simply did was, they took the white rat, and simply, every time little Albert saw the white rat, they banged trash cans over his head, made a loud noise. Well, eventually what happened was little Albert associated the white rat with the loud noise, and so what happened was the white rat became a learned stimulus. It was a predictor that a loud noise was going to come. So now, what happened was, it was neutral before. White rat came out on little Albert didn't do anything. Now, every time he sees it, he became scared because he associated it with the loud noise. Now, in the little Albert experiment conducted by John B. Watson, the white rat, prior to conditioning, served as what? Remember, did nothing. That's how you remember it. So most of you said right away, that's a neutral stimulus. Now, once the white rat became a conditioned stimulus, remember, learned means conditioned. See what I learned. And elicited or caused crying, Pavlov used second order, higher order conditioning. Again, what does that mean? He took the white rat that was neutral, and now because it became a learned, and tried to associate something with simply the white rat. And in this case, okay, through pairing the white rat with another neutral stimulus, like a white mask. The white mask, because eventually it was a predictor that the white rat was going to come, caused little Albert to also cry. Okay? Now, Albert also began to generalize between similar stimuli. Remember generalization. Generally speaking, they're the same. So he became scared of anything that was white and fluffy, which was kind of, the unethical part, because there's a lot of things white and fluffy, and little Albert cried. So in other words, little Albert, generally speaking, okay, cried anytime he saw something white and fluffy. Now, just to throw this out there, and this is adding something, but let's say you saw, a big white polar bear, but didn't cry when he saw the big white polar bear. What happened is that's called discrimination. In other words, he can discriminate between a white polar bear and, a white rat, but he could not discriminate between a white poodle and a white rat, because generally speaking, they look the same. Now, flooding, which we'll talk about, flooding and systematic desensitization, I'm going to skip over right now. But when we talk about therapy, eventually, when we talk about phobias, just to give you a little mindset here, people develop phobias because they make connections. What I just said, think about little Albert. Generally speaking, he was scared of anything that resembled that white rat. So what they have to do, okay, is use extinction. And that's what flooding and systematic desensitization are examples of. Remember, extinction was, little Albert, every time he saw a white rat, expected to hear a loud noise. That's what he became scared of. So you use extinction. You get rid of the unconditioned stimulus. Get rid of the loud noise. If little Albert sees that white rat enough times without the loud noise, extinction will take place, and the conditioned response will go poof, bye-bye. He won't cry anymore. Okay, and that's in fact what they had to do with the little guy. Now, Leanne has an intense phobia of birds. There we go. Her psychologist believes that in order to alleviate her phobia, Leanne must be placed in a room where she is surrounded by birds. Now, I'm going to teach this to you at another time, but in other words, she's flooded with birds, and that's what the example is. You want to get someone over there with fear of water, just throw them into water and flood them with it. All right, and it's not the nicest thing to do. Now, John Garcia showed that aversion, or dislike for a food, can become conditioned. Which, if anybody in here has had food poisoning, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, let me read through this. It's nice. A rat was given a noxious substance, a bad substance. When the noxious substance was paired with various stimuli that resulted in nausea, the rat would then avoid the stimuli in the future. Okay? Now let me back you through this. So again, a rat was given a noxious substance. When the noxious substance was paired with various stimuli that resulted in nausea, the rat would then avoid the stimuli in the future. Now, cattle owners who tried to get predators to stop eating their cattle did the following. They're going to follow this example. They gave the cattle a noxious substance. It's unconditioned. Automatically would cause something, which is nausea, which throwing up is the response, automatic response. Now, they paired the cattle with this substance. Remember, the substance itself automatically caused whatever it came in contact with, nausea, an unconditioned response. Well, when they mixed it, and the predator came over and ate the cattle, who had this noxious stomach or substance in them, the predator got sick. Well, the long and short of it, the predator linked the cattle with getting sick. So it learned. It took the neutral stimulus of cattle that did nothing for them before besides giving food. But what happened was, because they combined it with this noxious substance, the predator didn't know that, and it stayed away from the cattle altogether. It's a nice story. Now, associating a noxious substance, UCS, then creates nausea. Food is a neutral stimulus. Okay, think about this. So a taco, or should we say taco? Well, we don't want to go with the names of restaurants, but we'll just say taco. Let's say a taco, which is a neutral stimulus, gets paired with bacteria. Okay? Bacteria automatically causes a response. Now think about this, and most of you know this. Somebody eats a taco with bacteria in it, okay? They're going to associate the taco with the bacteria. So anytime they see the taco down the road, they're going to get kind of a sick feeling. So what they've done is, they paired the taco, which was a neutral stimulus, did nothing, with this bacteria that automatically caused people to throw up. And as a result, it became a learned stimulus. So anytime they see it, the conditioned response is they get sick to their stomach. Now, when Zach was 8 years old, he ate a piece of shrimp. That caused him to become ill. Now Zach is 17 and becomes nauseous whenever he smells shrimp. Now remember, shrimp before never did nothing to this poor kid. Zach has experienced one principle of classical conditioning. And most of you say, well, that's connected with tasteless complaint, that's conditioning taste aversion. Yeah, exactly. What he did was, okay, the shrimp was a neutral stimulus. It got obviously laced with something bad. And now poor kid associates shrimp with throwing up, which we know shrimp doesn't automatically make you do that. Now, Edward Thorndike believed that a subject was instrumental in manipulating its environment. What we've talked about up to here, classical conditioning automatically happens. Okay? You smell food, you're going to get hungry. It automatically happens. You don't have to be taught that. Alright? Another example, I haven't used yet, you shock somebody, they're automatically going to jump. You didn't have to teach them that. Okay? Try it out. Now, Thorndike found behaviors, okay, that simply were kind of coming down to this. Now, he believed when I said that a subject was instrumental in manipulating the environment. The subject then made a choice about whether or not his actions were going to be influenced by the consequences. You know, just to throw this out there, not everybody jumps through a hoop to get extra credit. They make a conscious choice whether or not they want to do the project. It's not automatic. You don't get extra credit, automatically start doing work. Now, Thorndike found behaviors resulting in escape or reward, okay, made you feel good, were stamped in. In other words, you were going to do it again. So you raised your hand, got extra credit, made you feel good, you were going to raise your hand again. Okay? Now, behaviors that were not successful, okay, or did not result in escape or simply reward, were stamped out. In other words, they weren't tried again. So if a rat pressed a lever, okay, and it opened up the gate and got through, the rat would press that lever again. It escaped. But if the rat pressed the lever and nothing happened, no treat was given, no door was open, rat's not pressing that lever again because he wasn't rewarded. This is what I'm describing as the law of effect. Now, behaviors resulted in rewards are stamped in. Stamped in means you'll do it again. Okay? Get $5 every time you raise your hand? Darn lucky you're going to raise your hand again. Now, with behaviors that did not result in rewards, okay, were stamped out. In other words, they didn't happen again. So you're raising it in class and nobody says nothing to you, no positive emotions come out of it, more than likely you might probably not going to raise your hand again there, my friend. Now, Skinner kind of extended the law of effect. Okay, Thorndike's work here. Now, to demonstrate this, he basically believed that classical conditioning explained reflex behavior. Reflex means automatically going to happen. You shock somebody, they're automatically going to stop. More automatically going to shout something. Now, operant conditioning, this is kind of how I like to teach it. How you operate depends on what you get. Get a reward, you're going to do that same thing again. Don't get a reward, probably not going to do that, same operation again. So how you operate or how you act depends on what you get. Ask me, that makes sense. To demonstrate this notion, you develop the Skinner box, or operant chamber, where pigeons' behavior was dependent on what behaviors were exhibited. This depends on either behavior being punished or reinforced. Now, punishment is a stimulus which basically decreases behavior happening again. Getting a detention, stimulus, is going to decrease you talking in class again. You're getting punished, erasing the behavior. Reinforcer increases the chance of that behavior happening again. You reinforce it. Reinforce it means to make sure it happens again. You like it. Kid raised his hand, you want to reinforce it. You want him raising his hand again in class. Now, what can you do to reinforce behavior? You can either use a primary reinforcer, which also often involves food or water, or something to satisfy a biological need, or you can use a secondary or a conditioned reinforcer or a learned reinforcer. Any previously neutral stimulus that gained reinforcement value after being associated with another reinforcer. What does that mean? You learned that money was important. You learned extra credit was important. Food, or like giving pizza, giving water, that's a primary reinforcer. So giving somebody a Gatorade after they run a mile will increase them probably running a mile again. Giving somebody $5 after they run a mile will also probably make sure they run a mile again. Now, good question here. In operant conditioning, a blank is any stimulus that increases behavior, and a blank is any stimulus that decreases. Put as an example. Decreases talking in a class, the kid gets punished. Exactly. Punishment is any stimulus that decreases behavior. A reinforcer is a stimulus that increases the behavior of raising your hand. Reinforcing, you want to do it again. You're reinforcing. Now, which of the following is considered a primary reinforcer? Remember, primary reinforcers deal with biological needs. So look at something like food and water. Ooh, there you see it. Glass of water. Nice job, guys. Nice job. Now, Skinner believed that behavior can be explained in 4 methods. Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. People, you got to pay attention to this. Positive means the addition of. You're adding. Get the mindset, it's a good feeling. Alright? And negative is a bad feeling. Positive is adding something. Negative is taking it away. Taking something away. Appetitive, AP for appealing, is desirable. Alright? They like it. Extra credit is appetitive. They like it. They love it. They need it. Aversive is AV for avoid. You don't want it. Avoid it. Dislike. Hate it. Cut them along. Now, increase in behavior, behavior continues. Decrease in behavior, behavior declines. Now, got to pay attention to this. In operant conditioning, removal of an aversive stimulus, causes the behavior. Removal. I want to come back to this. But most of you probably didn't get that because of this example. Now let me explain this to you. Alright, so again, positive reinforcement, presenting an appetitive, remember, appealing stimulus after behavior. Positive means the addition of. So the addition of $20 after he got an A on his test increases the chances that he'll get another A down the road. So again, it's the presenting or adding of an appetitive. $20 is appealing to him. Now I want to jump down to this one. Negative reinforcement. Remember, reinforcement increases behavior. And this is the one people struggle with because they're saying, well, how can something be negative and increase behavior? Remember, negative means the removal of an aversive stimulus. Aversive means bad. You want to avoid it. So think about it this way. The removal of cutting the lawn after you get an A will increase you getting an A again. So in other words, what you're doing is, to increase this kid to get another A in class, you're removing something negative. So think of it this way. If I had to give you an example, typically what you can refer to. Exemptions. What are exemptions all about? Alright, it's negative reinforcement. You're removing final, which is an aversive stimulus. You want to avoid finals. And increasing the chances of you coming to class. By pulling something away, something negative away, you're increasing behavior. Now, punishment Go back up to here. Positive punishment, presenting an aversive stimulus. Okay? Aversive means bad. After behavior, now punishment is, decreases. So, again, some people say, how can it be positive punishment? The addition of, okay, an aversive stimulus like having to cut the lawn. Okay, you're adding this now. You're not pulling it away. Pulling it away was negative because you're obviously increasing someone's behavior. The addition of cutting the lawn will decrease the behavior of you swearing around the house. Now, negative punishment, most of you are getting this, nice job, is taking away an appealing stimulus. So taking away your allowance, following you swearing in the house, will decrease you swearing down the road. And I think you got it. Good job. Now, a couple questions. Jillian was out past her curfew on Saturday. As a result, her parents took away. Again, took means negative, her driving privileges. Driving is a great thing, so it's appetitive, appealing. Now, they obviously want to decrease her coming home, down the road late. So again, they took something away, so you look at the word negative. Okay? She liked to drive, so that's obviously, definitely, going to be a punishment. Negative punishment. Now, within negative reinforcement are two types of learning. Escape learning and avoidance. Got one in this. Escape learning is when a human being or animal removes itself from the aversive stimulus. An annoying person enters the room and you leave. Why are you going to, again, reinforcement, okay, makes you do it again. So when you leave the room and you feel better that you're not around the annoying person, you're going to do it again. Okay? And that's kind of the same thing from an upcoming aversive stimulus. Each time a commercial comes on, you get up to get a drink of water. So in other words, here's the thing. Escape means you escape somebody that's presently in front of you. Avoid means you're going to avoid a future situation. That's the only difference. Okay? Now, being able to understand when reinforcement is available and when it is not is an important aspect in classical as well as operant conditioning. Okay? So knowing that the food bowl is coming is going to help strengthen behavior. Right? They're able to predict it. Now, discriminative stimulus, or stimulus discrimination. A stimulus that signals the subject that reinforcement is available. A dad reaching into his wallet to grab money is a signal that you're going to get reinforced. The teacher shutting their book is a signal that reinforcement of being done with class is going to come. Now, a person smiling gives you a signal to ask him or her out. Most of you mess that up, but that's interesting. Now, stimulus generalization. A behavioral response performed to similar stimuli that signal the availability of the reinforcement. So in other words, a smile can be a number of signals for reinforcement. They like you, they want to go out with you, and so on. Now, shaping is using reinforcement to guide behavior in a certain way. So if you want a rat to get to the end of the maze, if you put reinforcement on the trail that you want that rat to follow, you're shaping that behavior to go whatever which way you can. Okay, I can give you extra credit to shape you to pass that national exam. Shape you into a point where you do well in the exam. Okay? Now, timing affects the behavior. You want this to be as immediate as possible. So when they do something good, give them the reinforcement right after. Don't wait till the end of the week. Alright? If they raise their hand in class, you don't give them extra credit the next day. You give them extra credit right away. Reinforce right away. Okay? Immediately. No one likes to wait. Now, continuous reinforcement is you reinforce every single time they perform a desired behavior. Every time a hand goes up, you give them extra credit. Now this is good for quick learning. Kid's going to learn right away. Raise his hand in class. Okay? Problem is, it's going to be very quickly extinguished. In other words, kids will give up. Okay? Once they don't get extra credit. Remember, ask yourself, why does the kid raise his hand? He wants extra credit.
Reminder to all boys interested in baseball trials, which begin Monday. Meeting starts at 2:30 in room DO8, Coach Lindsay's room. I will see you there shortly.
You take away the extra credit, and they're used to getting it every single time they raise their hand. They're not going to raise their hand again. Now, partial reinforcement, or intermittent reinforcement schedule, is you reinforce some of the time. So once in a while they raise their hand. Now, the nice thing about that is, They're not going to quit as easily because they don't know when they're going to get reinforcement. And I hate to jump right into this example, but it's a prime one. Not everybody wins every single time they play the lottery, but they win once in a while. And that once in a while will keep them coming back every single time. Okay? Now, let's look at some partial reinforcement schedules. Okay, or first let's get to a question. Nice. Jake is training his dog to sit on command. Jake gives his dog a treat every time, continuously, right? Right off the bat. Continuous reinforcement. Why? Because it's good for quick learning. Okay? But Jake better ease up on that and use partial reinforcement, or the moment he doesn't give his dog a treat, the dog's not going to sit anymore. Now, if you want to train your dog to roll over, it's best to initially put her on which type of schedule. And again, good. Continuous reinforcement. You're teaching something new. Now, the schedules of reinforcement, or partial reinforcement. Again, remember partial is once in a while. Fixed ratio is reinforcement is provided after a set number of correct responses. Ratio means number. Fixed means set. Now, interval, okay, as you read down here, is based on time. So again, ratio based on amount. So, a rat receives a food pellet every 5 times it presses a lever. That's a nice one, but I like this example better. Remember, ratio is amount, based on an amount. So every 5th cup of coffee is free. So you buy 4 cups. It's a set amount. 4 is a number, right? Okay? It's based on an amount. 4 cups is an amount. Your 5th one's free. It's fixed. Okay? Very good. Now, variable ratio. Vary means to change. Ratio still means amount. Okay? A slot machine at a casino rewards the player after a varying number of pulls, a varying amount of pulls. You might pull the lever 15 times, you get reinforced with money. You might then have to pull it only once again, and you get reinforced, or you might pull it 30 times and never get amounts. It's a varying number. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5, but it's a varying amount of numbers. Now, remember, interval means time, fixed time. So your favorite TV show comes on every Monday at 8 o'clock. So it's a fixed time. Now, if you have a quiz every Friday, it's a fixed time. Okay, it doesn't vary. Now, variable interval is a varying time. Why some people get frustrated with shows after football. Football games don't end at a specific time. All right, so if your favorite show comes on at 8, that's a fixed interval. However, if it comes on after the game and we don't know when the game's going to enter, that's called a variable interval. It varies, okay? Like a pop quiz, varies. You never know what's going to come. Now, Julie worked at a shoe factory, lovely job, and is paid based on the number of shoes. In other words, on the number of shoes she produces in a day. This is an example of, okay, fixed ratio. She is paid on the number of shoes she produces. There's a set number, okay? Now, so in this case, how long it takes is predetermined. Now, a rat receives a food pellet after a certain desired behavior is performed. And that's performed after your elapsed time of 45 seconds, a set time. And most of you said, well, times interval. If it's set, exactly, it's got to be a fixed interval, which it is. Now, behavior modification, we're going to talk about a little bit when we get to therapy. You're modifying behavior. So ignoring the behavior and not providing attention or reinforcement after the behavior is called extinction. So let's look at that. Okay? Some kids just want attention. The attention that they get is the reinforcement. That's what they want. You just don't give them what they want. You extinguish simply what they expect to happen. So if a kid swears, they expect the teacher to get mad. If you don't get mad, the kid doesn't get what he wants, might not do it again. Now, token economy is often used in rehabilitation centers. Okay? Reinforces desirable behavior. So the person raises their hand in group, they get a token. They take that token then to a store, and then they can exchange it and get something in return. Okay? That's again an example of token economy. Now, students in Mr. Wynn's class receive a gold star every time they answer a question correctly. After a student receives 10 gold stars, he or she earns a pencil. Something to look forward to. Now, this is, again, they're given tokens, which in this particular case, a token can be anything. In this particular case, it's a gold star. And then they go exchange it, and they get something in return. Now, cognitive psychologists look at how mental process affect how we interpret this reinforcement. Okay? Now, there's several things associated with cognition. One of them, Martin Seligman, author of Positive Psychology, developed the concept of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is simply if you are not rewarded, okay, after a certain number of tries, you're eventually going to give up. So, if you, for example, get, I'll use one example that they use in psychology. If the rat keeps on trying to get out of, this jar, okay, and the jar is laced with Crisco, which is very slippery, and the rat fails every time it tries to get to the top of the jar to get out, eventually it's just going to die in the bottom and give up. And it's the same thing with human behavior. If you fail enough times, eventually, whatever it is you're trying, it's going to get put in the closet and you're never going to do it again. Now, Edward Tolman looked at cognitive learning of mice, okay? And once he realized is that when mice are reinforced, in other words, if you use shaping, remember shaping is using reinforcement to guide their behavior. If you shape their behavior to go through a maze, eventually what that rat does, when it runs that maze a few times, it will produce a cognitive map in its mind. So in other words, it can navigate itself through this maze because it has a mental picture of it in its head. It no longer needs reinforcement. Like when I walk my dog, for example, my dog, because we've gone the same way every single time, and the reinforcement is it gets home okay. It simply knows where to make certain turns because it's got a mental layout, like GPS, of our neighborhood. Okay? Now, lane learning is learning that takes place, but you don't know of whether or not it's learned until reinforcement is given. Now, I know that sounds complicated, but this is an example of a football game. Kids are learning plays during practice. You're not going to know until they're in the game later in the week whether or not they learned it because that's when reinforcement's given. What do I mean reinforcement? Getting a touchdown, all right? Scoring points. So in other words, lane learning is you're learning in this class all along. We're not going to know whether or not you know the material until reinforcement's given, which is, obviously college credit during the national exam. Now, while giving your friend directions to a local fast food restaurant, you close your eyes and recall all the landmarks that he'll pass on the way. Okay? So you simply say you're going to make a left on 15 and you picture, the Snoqual station there. You have a cognitive map in your head. Okay? Now the last part of this is observational learning. Albert Bandura conducted an experiment called the Pavlov experiment. And it looked at simply how people observed others and if they got rewarded, would they not repeat the behavior.
Walter Reed and John McLeod, please report to room D16. Walter Reed and John McLeod, please report to D16.
Alright, so long story short, there was this group of kids that watched two rooms. Okay? One group of kids watched a room where a bubble doll is just a doll, you push it, it pops back up. And you guys probably have one at home. But what happened was, when these adults punched their bubble dolls and the rest of the people cheered, when these kids who watched the adults get rewarded for beating up their bubble dolls, when they got a chance to play with their bubble dolls, they beat them up. Now, the other group of children that watched adults get punished or yelled at when they pushed over their bubble dolls, when they had their chance to play with their bubble dolls, they did not push them over. So in other words, here's a good example of application of the bubble doll experiment. One of your friends goes out and asks out a person at a party, and they say yes. More than likely, you observe the way they ask the person out, and because they got rewarded with a yes answer, they're probably going to ask out another person the same way. Okay? Same thing with speeding. You see somebody pulled over by a police officer, you see him getting punished, you're probably going to slow down. Okay? Now, again, what is 7-year-old Robert most likely to do after watching a violent television program? If they're getting rewarded in the movie for shooting people or doing something violent, and rewarded means money, fame, whatever, unfortunately they're probably going to make the same, mistake. That's why you got to watch what these kids watch, okay? Because they're going to observe them, and they're simply going to repeat behaviors, especially if they're repeated or rewarded.